The prophecy unveiled. Captain Eric "Buck" Rogers couldn't shake the disbelief as he stood before the regal Queen Hippolyta of the Hypatian race. He was no hero from prophecy, just a pilot who had narrowly escaped death. Yet here he was, the center of a tale that seemed to belong in myth rather than reality. Buck's mind raced as he tried to process Alara's words. She believed he was the one foretold in their ancient prophecies, the off-worlder destined to father a new generation of Hypatians, stronger and more resilient than any before. The pressure of it all was overwhelming. Hippolyta's piercing emerald eyes scrutinized him, evaluating his worth with a gaze that made him feel exposed and vulnerable. The Queen's presence was commanding, her beauty and power undeniable. This was a woman who had seen much, ruled long, and whose decisions shaped the fate of her people. "You doubt the prophecy." Hippolyta's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and clear. Buck hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Your Majesty," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I'm just a soldier, a pilot. I'm not sure I'm the man your prophecy speaks of." Hippolyta's expression softened, but her eyes remained stern. "Prophecies are rarely clear, Captain Rogers. They speak in riddles and metaphors, often revealing their true meaning only in hindsight. But Alara has faith in you, and that is not something I take lightly." Alara stepped closer, her presence a comforting contrast to the Queen's imposing demeanor. "Mother," she said softly, "the Hive threatens all life in the galaxy. We cannot stand by and do nothing. We have the power to make a difference." The Queen's gaze flicked back to Buck. "And you, Captain? Will you accept this responsibility? Will you fight not just for your world, but for the future of ours as well?" Buck's heart pounded in his chest. The weight of the decision was crushing. He thought of the friends he had lost in battle, the colonies that would be overrun if the Hive wasn't stopped. Could he really turn away from this chance, however uncertain, to make a difference? He took a deep breath. "If there's a chance to stop the Hive, I'll do whatever it takes." A murmur spread through the court, and Hippolyta nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "We shall see if you truly are the one the prophecy speaks of. But know this, Captain Rogers, should you fail, it will not just be your world that suffers." Buck felt the weight of her words, the enormity of the task ahead. But there was no turning back now. The fate of more than just Earth rested on his shoulders. Hippolyta rose from her throne, her presence filling the room. "Prepare him," she commanded. "If he is to be the father of our future, he must first prove his worth." Buck swallowed hard, the reality of his situation sinking in. This was no ordinary battle. This was a test of his very being, his courage and his strength. And the survival of entire worlds might depend on his success. The trial begins. As the court dispersed, Buck was led by Alara through the palace's winding corridors. The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of shared purpose and unspoken emotions. Alara's expression was serious, her usual warmth tempered by the gravity of what lay ahead. "The Queen will test you," Alara explained as they walked. "She must be certain you are worthy before she will consider allowing you to fulfill the prophecy." Buck nodded, though his stomach churned with anxiety. "What kind of test?" Alara hesitated before answering. "It will be difficult. You will be challenged physically, mentally, and emotionally. My mother believes in pushing to the limits, beyond what one believes they can endure." Buck felt a shiver run down his spine. "And if I fail?" "Then the prophecy will remain unfulfilled," Alara replied quietly, her voice laced with concern. "And the Hypatians will continue to stand apart, watching as the galaxy falls to the Hive." They reached a set of massive doors, intricately carved with symbols that Buck didn't recognize. Alara pushed them open, revealing a chamber that seemed to hum with energy. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar herbs, and the walls glowed with a soft, pulsating light. "This is the Chamber of Trials," Alara said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "It is where our greatest warriors are tested, where they prove their strength and resolve." Buck's heart pounded as he stepped inside. The chamber felt alive, as if it were watching him, waiting for him to begin. He glanced at Alara, who gave him a reassuring nod. "I'll be here," she said softly. "But remember, this is your trial. You must face it alone." Buck took a deep breath, steeling himself. He had faced death before, fought against overwhelming odds. But this felt different. This was a test not just of his skills, but of his very soul. As the doors closed behind him, he knew there was no turning back. Whatever awaited him in the chamber, he would face it head-on. The fate of more than just his world depended on it. The test of strength. The chamber darkened as Buck moved deeper inside, the pulsating light dimming until it was barely more than a faint glow. The air grew heavier, the scent of herbs stronger, almost intoxicating. He could feel the energy of the room pressing down on him, testing his resolve before the true trial had even begun. Suddenly, the floor beneath him shifted, and Buck stumbled as the chamber transformed. The walls melted away, replaced by dense jungle, the air thick with humidity. The sounds of alien wildlife filled his ears, and he found himself standing in a clearing, surrounded by towering trees with leaves that shimmered with an iridescent light. Before he could react, a creature burst from the underbrush, a massive, hulking beast covered in thick, armored scales. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, and its claws dug into the earth as it charged toward him with a deafening roar. Buck's instincts kicked in, and he dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the creature's snapping jaws. He rolled to his feet, drawing the blade that had been provided to him, its edge gleaming in the dim light. The beast circled him, its eyes locked onto its prey. Buck could see the intelligence behind those eyes, the predatory cunning. This was no mindless monster. It was a hunter, and Buck was its quarry. He tightened his grip on the blade, waiting for the beast to make its move. When it charged again, he was ready. He ducked under its swinging claws, slashing at its exposed underbelly. The blade struck true, and the beast let out a roar of pain, its blood splattering the ground. But it wasn't enough. The creature barely seemed to notice the wound, its focus on Buck unwavering. It lunged at him again, faster this time, forcing Buck to backpedal, trying to stay out of reach. He could feel his strength waning, the trial already taking its toll. The beast was relentless, its attacks growing more ferocious with each passing moment. Buck knew he couldn't keep this up forever. Desperation gave him the edge he needed. As the beast lunged once more, Buck sidestepped and drove his blade into its exposed side with all the strength he could muster. The creature howled in agony, thrashing wildly as it tried to dislodge the weapon. But Buck held on, using the beast's momentum to drive the blade deeper. With a final furious roar, the creature collapsed to the ground, its body twitching before it lay still. Buck staggered back, panting heavily as he wiped the sweat from his brow. The jungle around him began to fade, the trees dissolving into mist as the chamber returned to its original form. The scent of herbs was replaced by the familiar, cool air of the palace. The first trial was over, but Buck knew this was only the beginning. He had proven his physical strength, but the chamber had more tests in store for him. As he stood in the center of the room, his heart still racing from the battle, he wondered what else the Queen had in store, and whether he would be able to survive it. The test of mind. The chamber shifted again, and Buck found himself standing in what looked like a vast library. Shelves upon shelves of books towered above him, their spines inscribed with symbols he didn't recognize. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and ink, and the only sound was the faint rustling of pages as if the books themselves were alive. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, upon which rested a single ancient tome. Its cover was worn, and its pages yellowed with age, but it seemed to emanate a faint glow, drawing Buck's attention. As he approached the pedestal, the room darkened, and a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant. "This is a test of mind, Captain Rogers. Here, you will face your own doubts, your fears, and your insecurities. Only by confronting them can you hope to proceed." Buck swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. He had faced physical challenges before, but this was different. The battlefield of the mind was one he had never fully mastered. The voice continued, its tone unwavering. The tome before you contains the knowledge of the Hypatians, our history, our secrets, our fears. To pass this trial, you must read from it and answer the questions it presents. But be warned, failure to answer correctly will bring dire consequences. Buck's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the book. The leather was cool to the touch, worn smooth by the hands of countless others who had faced this trial. He opened the cover, revealing pages filled with intricate script, the language unfamiliar but somehow readable. As he began to read, the words seemed to come alive, swirling around him, filling his mind with images and sounds. He saw the rise and fall of empires, the birth of stars, the dance of galaxies. He felt the hopes and fears of countless beings, their lives intertwined in the vast tapestry of the universe. And then the questions began. The first was simple enough, a test of logic and reasoning. Buck answered without hesitation, the words coming to him as if by instinct. The book seemed to approve, its glow intensifying as he turned the page. But the questions grew more complex, more personal. They delved into his past, his regrets, his fears. They forced him to confront the memories he had buried deep, the choices he had made, and the lives he had taken. The room seemed to close in around him as the weight of his past bore down on him. He could feel the chamber's energy pressing against him, testing his resolve, his sanity. But Buck was no stranger to darkness. He had faced it before, in the heat of battle, in the silence of space. He had stared into the void and found the strength to push forward. He answered each question with a steady voice, refusing to let the doubts take hold. He had come too far to be defeated by his own mind. Finally, the questions ceased, and the book's glow faded. The chamber returned to its original state, the oppressive energy lifting. Buck let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He had passed the second trial, but there was one more to come. The test of heart. The chamber shifted once more, and Buck found himself standing in a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with emotion, the walls pulsating with a faint, rhythmic beat that seemed to resonate with his own heartbeat. In the center of the room stood a mirror, its surface smooth and flawless. Buck's reflection stared back at him, but there was something unsettling about it. His eyes seemed darker, his expression more solemn. This was the test of heart, the final trial. Here Buck knew he would face the deepest parts of himself, the parts he had long kept hidden, even from himself. The voice from before returned, softer now, almost a whisper. "This is the final test, Captain Rogers. You must look into the mirror and see yourself as you truly are. Not as others see you, but as you see yourself. Only then can you find the strength to fulfill the prophecy." Buck hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. He had faced physical challenges, tested his mind. But this was something else entirely. This was a test of his very soul. He stepped forward, his reflection growing clearer. The man in the mirror was him, but also not him. He was older, warier, his eyes filled with a lifetime of pain and regret. Buck stared into his own eyes, seeing the ghosts of his past reflected back at him. The friends he had lost, the battles he had fought, the lives he had taken. He saw the weight of every decision he had ever made, every choice that had led him to this moment. The mirror seemed to pulse with his emotions, amplifying them, forcing him to confront the truths he had long tried to ignore. He saw the fear that had driven him, the anger that had fueled him, the guilt that had haunted him. He saw the man he had become, and the man he had always feared he would be. But he also saw something else. He saw the strength that had carried him through, the courage that had kept him fighting, even when all seemed lost. He saw the love he had for his friends, his comrades, his world. And he saw hope. The reflection in the mirror began to change, the darkness lifting, replaced by a soft, golden light. Buck's eyes brightened, his expression softening. He saw the man he could be, the man he wanted to be, the the man the prophecy spoke of. The voice returned, stronger now. You have faced your fears, Captain Rogers. You have confronted your doubts and your regrets. You have seen yourself as you truly are, and you have found the strength to continue. Buck nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. He had passed the final test. He had faced the darkness within himself and emerged stronger. The chamber began to fade, the walls dissolving into mist. Buck felt himself being pulled back, the world around him shifting once more. When he opened his eyes, he was back in the palace, Alara standing before him, her eyes filled with pride and relief. And he knew it would be the hardest of all. "You did it," she said softly, a smile breaking across her face. "You passed the trials." Buck smiled back, the weight of the trials lifting from his shoulders. "Yeah," he said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "I did." Alara stepped forward, taking his hand in hers. "Now, Captain Rogers," she said, her voice filled with hope, "the real journey begins, the prophecy fulfilled." The Hypatian court gathered once more, their expressions a mixture of awe and anticipation. The trials were over, and Buck had emerged victorious. He had proven himself worthy, not just in the eyes of the Queen, but in the eyes of the Hypatian people. Hippolyta stood before him, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable. "Captain Rogers," she began, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, "you have faced our trials and emerged victorious. You have proven yourself strong of body, mind, and heart. You are, indeed, the one our prophecy spoke of." Buck's heart pounded in his chest, the reality of it all finally sinking in. He had passed the trials, but now came the true test, the fulfillment of the prophecy. Hippolyta gestured for Alara to step forward. The princess did so with grace and confidence, her eyes never leaving Buck's. There was a connection between them, forged through the trials, through the shared burden of responsibility. "Alara," Hippolyta continued, "you have always been my most trusted advisor, my most beloved daughter. And now you will help lead our people into a new era." Alara nodded, her expression solemn. "I will, Mother. And I will do so with Captain Rogers by my side." Hippolyta turned her gaze back to Buck. "The prophecy speaks of a union, a joining of two worlds, two peoples. Captain Rogers, will you stand by my daughter's side? Will you help her lead our people and fulfill the prophecy?" Buck felt the weight of her words, the enormity of the responsibility. But he also felt a deep sense of purpose, a certainty that this was what he was meant to do. "I will," he said firmly, his voice steady. "I will stand by Alara's side. Together, we will face whatever comes." The court erupted in applause, the sound reverberating through the palace. The Hypatians had found their hope, their future, and Buck was at the center of it all. As the celebration began, Alara took Buck's hand, her eyes filled with emotion. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with relief and joy. "We really did it." Buck smiled, the tension finally leaving his body. "Yeah," he said softly, "we did." But even as they celebrated, Buck knew that this was only the beginning. The hive was still out there, still a threat, and they would need to be ready for whatever came next. But for now, in this moment, they had won. They had faced the trials, fulfilled the prophecy, and found hope where there had once been only despair. And that was enough. The new beginning. The Hypatian sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the palace grounds. Buck and Alara stood side by side on a balcony, looking out over their people as they celebrated below. It had been a long, hard journey, but they had made it. The prophecy had been fulfilled, and now a new era was beginning. One of hope, of unity, of strength. Alara turned to Buck, her eyes filled with warmth and affection. "I couldn't have done this without you," she said softly, her voice filled with gratitude. Buck smiled, his heart swelling with emotion. "We did this together," he replied, "and together we'll face whatever comes next." Alara nodded, her expression serious. "The hive is still a threat. We can't let our guard down." "I know, Buck said, his voice resolute. "But we'll be ready. We've come this far, and we're not going to back down now." Alara smiled, a spark of determination in her eyes. "No, we're not." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the first stars began to appear in the sky. Buck looked up, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He had faced his fears, his doubts, and had emerged stronger. He had found a purpose, a reason to keep fighting. And as he stood there, hand in hand with Alara, he knew that they were ready for whatever the future held. The journey was far from over, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and they had the strength of the Hypatian people behind them. And together, they would face the challenges ahead, with hope in their hearts and the strength of their bond guiding them forward. For Buck Rogers, the adventure was just beginning. And this time, he knew he was ready.